Here's the problem. Since Cleveland's public transit agency, Greater Cleveland RTA, took over light rail rapid lines from the suburb of Shaker Heights in the 1970s, the agency has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into maintaining and renovating the rapid lines, now known as the Green and Blue lines.
As in the Shaker Green line, the tracks will be removed. Ties, some of them 50 years old, will be thrown out.
Today, however, fewer people use Cleveland's light rail lines compared to even an average bus. With such low ridership, what can be done to save light rail in Cleveland? Should it even be saved? Okay, so maybe save is a bit excessive. There are no existing plans to eliminate the Green and Blue lines. However, low ridership is still a problem because transit funding and resources are limited, especially in a state like Ohio. You can only pay for so many vehicles, operators, maintenance projects, etc. Therefore, you would want to prioritize funding towards routes and projects that would benefit the greatest number of riders to the greatest extent. So, spending money on bus shelters or dedicated lanes along a major bus route might make much more of a positive impact on riders than spending that same money on service and maintenance for a light rail line that fewer people use. So, what I'm really trying to say is, let's stop operating the Green and Blue line. Okay, not quite. There are still good reasons to keep it around. First, many cities around the United States are spending millions or billions of dollars constructing light rail lines.
The light rail extension in Tacoma's Hilltop neighborhood will welcome its first passengers.
The Hennepin County Board and the Metropolitan Council have officially approved the route to extend light rail transit from Minneapolis to Brooklyn Park.
Sound Transit Board approved a proposal to launch the East Link light rail starter line.
Valley Metro working on 2 major light rail extensions connecting the Valley riders from north to south.
Meanwhile, Cleveland already has light rail. Tearing out light rail at a time when others are building it seems like a step in the wrong direction. Moreover, it would mean losing 12.7 miles of dedicated right-of-way, including roughly 3 miles of grade-separated track where trains don't have to stop for lights or traffic, saving up to a quarter of an hour compared to a parallel bus route. So the Green and Blue lines have the potential to offer a faster, more convenient service than a local bus. Most importantly, GCRTA is already spending $208.2 million to completely rebuild the Green and Blue lines. For better or for worse, this means that the RTA intends to continue operating the light rail lines for at least a few more decades. So now, that leaves us with how we can make the best out of this investment. In other words, how can we increase ridership? To come up with a solution, let's take a look at why ridership is so low to begin with. First, local bus routes are not designed to feed passengers into the light rail lines. There are only 2 bus routes that begin or end at a light rail station, and a handful of other north-south routes that intersect elsewhere. This contrasts with light rail metros such as St. Louis's Metrolink, whose stations serve as major transit centers for connecting buses. However, Cleveland's Green and Blue lines were never intended to be light rail metros, nor does it fully explain why ridership is as low as it is. The larger issue is that there aren't enough people, jobs, and destinations around the light rail stations, especially on the Green line. Large, spaced-out single-family homes dominate the immediate areas around the stations, with few exceptions. Or, as a friend likes to put it,
transit-oriented McMansions.
Contrast this with high ridership bus routes, such as the 26, which traverses through denser, more walkable parts of the city. And with low density comes low ridership, leading to lower frequencies. In the case of the Green and Blue lines, a train comes only every half hour. This further disincentivizes people from riding and further lowers ridership. So to increase ridership, we need to create a dense, walkable environment along the Green and Blue lines. If you're familiar with urban planning, you probably know where this is going. Transit-oriented development, or TOD. This is developing dense, walkable, mixed-use destinations around transit. Most transit agencies and local municipalities are aware of TOD, and many have tried to pursue it, including the RTA and various municipalities in the greater Cleveland area. Because not only does it boost transit ridership, it creates a financially thriving destination that local residents can enjoy as well. So let's go back to the year 2000. The city of Shaker Heights created a strategic investment plan that highlighted 2 stations to target TOD efforts at, along the light rail lines. One of them is at Lee and Van Aken Station on the Blue Line. The station itself is surrounded by civic buildings, such as City Hall, Police Department, and Library. To the southeast, an old mixed-use building lines the front of the road. Further south, a large strip mall lines Chagrin Boulevard, with a more Main Street-style development just across the street. For a strategic plan created by a wealthy suburb in 2000, is actually quite critical of the car-oriented nature of the area. The report describes the area adjacent to the transit station as a difficult, if not impossible, pedestrian environment. The report continues to describe surrounding roads as overcapacity, chaotic, undesigned, barren wastelands, devoid of character and scale. The report doesn't mince its words regarding commercial development either, describing it as squalid, anti-pedestrian, and bleak, and even concluding that these roads serve to reinforce segregation between wealthier neighborhoods to the north from the more modest neighborhoods to the south. So what did the plan recommend? Building and rerouting streets to create a smaller, walkable street grid. Expansion and infill development to activate the street with pedestrian traffic, especially on corners at intersections. A road diet on Chagrin, with wider sidewalks. Mixed-use infill directly above and adjacent to the station to create a continuous pedestrian environment from the station to the shopping plaza. The next part of our story happens 7 years later. The year is 2007, and in response to RTA's renovation of Lee Van Aken Station, Shaker Heights creates a new TOD plan that would clarify and modify the recommendations made in the SIP from 2000. In the new TOD plan, most recommendations were kept the same. For example, the plan still calls for infill development directly adjacent to the station. However, instead of a mixed-use building on the southeast corner of Lee Road and Van Aken, the new plan suggests condominiums with ground floor interior parking. The plan also cuts back on infill due to parking requirements. With smaller buildings and no infill development on this parking lot, this would leave a giant gap between the station and the shopping plaza. And next to the station, instead of a mixed-use building with ground floor retail, the new plan suggests a condominium with ground floor parking. Why? Concerns regarding traffic flow and compatibility of ground floor retail with adjacent residential uses. In other words, traffic and neighborhood character, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense considering what is right across the road. If it's not obvious, this plan is a bit underwhelming compared to the original proposal. It fails to fully connect the station with the surrounding area using infill due to concerns over traffic and insufficient parking, which feels ironic given that the purpose of this development is to encourage walking, cycling, and transit use over driving. And as of 2024, not much has happened since plans were made in 2000, almost 25 years ago. Well, except for this auto shop, which is supposed to be redeveloped into a new government building and retail space. However, Lee Van Aken Station wasn't the only area targeted for TOD in the Strategic Investment Plan from 2000. Warrensville Van Aken Station at the end of the Blue Line was also studied for potential transit-oriented development. The plan recommended reconfiguring this intersection as a circle. It also suggested a bolder approach to development, redeveloping the strip mall and parking lots as mixed-use residential with ground floor retail to create a town center around the station. In 2008, Shaker Heights followed up with another plan that analyzed TOD at Warrensville Van Aken. The plan also suggested mixed-use residential with adjustments to the road layout and a proposed extension of the Blue Line to create room for a larger transit center. More importantly, it created 10 major recommendations for implementation, from tax incentives to prioritization of public investment. 6 years later, Shaker Heights finally finds a developer for the site and finalizes the site plan. It features multiple mixed-use buildings with ground floor retail facing a central street. The Blue Line extension is scrapped. Instead, more room for development will take its place. Moreover, the city decides to create a tax increment financing district to further encourage development. And then, as part of Phase 1, the northern portion of the site is finished by 2019, and it has stayed true to its original goals. Van Aken is now a town center for Shaker Heights that attracts people from throughout the area. There are people walking around and visiting stores, even on a bitter cold January day. More importantly, although the pandemic and construction projects have reduced ridership overall, the Blue Line is seeing higher ridership on weekends and evenings when people are visiting the Van Aken district. So, how did TOD plans at Warrensville Van Aken become a reality, while TOD plans at Lee Van Aken only remained on paper? One of the advantages that Warrensville Van Aken had was that the entire area around the station could be redeveloped. This created a blank slate from which a developer had more freedom to create a walkable, mixed-use environment. On the other hand, Lee Van Aken only allowed for modest infill. limiting what could be done to improve a car-oriented strip mall. The city likely prioritized TOD efforts at Warrensville Van Aken over Lee Van Aken due to the need to reconfigure this dangerous intersection, and also probably because of the bolder, more transformative vision for TOD at Warrensville Van Aken. Moreover, the Van Aken project was always envisioned and described as a town center, whereas the Lee Van Aken plan seemed to lose that vision, replacing it with a goal to make the area just slightly denser instead. Finally, TOD takes time. Even in the case of the Warrensville Van Aken project, it took nearly 20 years from initial plans to complete Phase 1, and it will likely take longer to see enough ridership that surpasses an average bus route. In the long term, however, TOD looks like a promising strategy to increase ridership and to justify further investment into Cleveland's light rail system on at least the Blue Line. You might have noticed that I never mentioned any TOD plans along the Green Line, and that is because most of the land around the Green Line stations are already built out for single-family homes. This leaves little room for infill. Even at stations like Green Road, where some infill is possible, the residential nature of the area would probably mean that any higher density mixed-use infill would receive fierce neighborhood opposition, making such a project nearly impossible. This really limits the potential for increased ridership on the Green Line. So maybe it makes more sense to reduce or eliminate service on the Green Line. This way, Green Line trains and operators can be put onto the Blue Line, bringing Blue Line frequencies up to every 15 minutes and further stimulating ridership when paired with TOD. And yes, eliminating routes can be a hard decision to make, especially since it could decide what jobs and services a person has access to. However, average income and vehicle ownership rates in Shaker Heights are relatively high compared to other parts of the Cleveland area. Combined with the fact that there are few businesses and jobs around its stations, eliminating the Green Line will likely have a much smaller impact on transit riders than eliminating other routes. Again, there are no plans to eliminate either route within the near future. In the long term, however, it will be interesting to see what the RTA decides to do with its light rail lines, especially when it comes to which lines, if any, it prioritizes funding for. Perhaps the RTA will decide to consolidate services onto the Blue Line. Perhaps more transit funding will allow the RTA to keep operating both lines. Regardless of the scenario, if we make the right investments, light rail in Cleveland is here to stay.